I was one of the little children that Janet Cameron and Hallie Hughes came over to this neighborhood to start the Sunday school for. And a whole bunch of us, it used to be just a neighborhood, you know. Mm-hmm. It wasn't apartments, it was just houses. And our play area was the road because it just stopped at the top of the hill and there wasn't that many cars. So we would play out in the road, you know, softball and all this stuff. And they came over one day and they saw all of us. And they come and talked to us. So the next thing I knew, you know, they were inviting us to Sunday school. They were going to start a Sunday school class.
We came here in 67. And we were Presbyterians, but we visited around a lot of different churches. And Northside was the last one we visited, and it was home. We loved the people. We loved Wilkie, and that's where we landed.
Well, people usually go to all the churches in town and decide. Well, I don't remember going to very many churches. We just started with Presbyterian.
We were not charter members. That is, the church was going when we realized that, shoot, why should we go all the way over there when there was a Presbyterian church over there?
Ed and I had been here for a while in this house, going to Blacksburg Presbyterian, and so were the Robesons and another family, the Tingas, and the McMurtry's. Yes. And we all had 4 children, except the Tingas had 2. And we were approached about coming to Northside. Well, Ed would like to have gone to a smaller church. He was kind of lost in the other church, but I had been teaching Sunday school there. But I said that was fine by me. It was very close.
As you probably know, Diana was raised Episcopalian and I was raised Methodist. And turns out Presbyterian happened to be the thing that suited us both.
Did your whole family go then?
Yes. Nobody was left behind.
And your mom in a red dress?
Probably. She's always loved her red. But we all went. Nobody was allowed not to, no matter what you did on Saturday.
Now, I will tell you that I had never been to a church that did not have pews. And when I first went in the sanctuary, I went, oh, there are no pews here. This is really different. I have grown to love that.
It was a small church, and it had a choir, a small choir. They sang the old songs. And, of course, everybody remembers Hallie and Janet. They were there, and...
They started that church.
Yes.
They call that area...
Pot Liquor Flats.
Pot Liquor Flats.
That was in the old days.
And they started out as a Sunday school.
Yes.
And the big Presbyterian started, and Hallie and Janet were the ones in charge of it. Well, we had that land. And the Catholic Church was interested in perhaps collaborating with us.
They had the money.
They had the money.
We had the land.
And we were going merrily making plans when some bishop put the kibosh on the whole thing.
We were going to collaborate together and share, build a building and then share it. And I would like to mention the choir. I love the choir.
Oh, nice.
And we like to see it in front of us.
The dedication, always on Wednesday nights, coming to rehearsal and practice, and I just think the choir is wonderful.
Well, Wilkie was a pseudo-athlete. He was very much interested in athletics, and at the time there weren't any facilities around Blacksburg. The churches did not have facilities, and he was very much in favor of building a facility, a multi-purpose facility. And originally, the plan called for a full basketball court where we now have our sanctuary. And when push came to shove, it looked like we weren't going to be able to manage that, so we decided on a half basketball court. But when we played basketball there, the parquet began to come loose. So we had to build the floor. And this, I think that was a real togetherness. All the men of the church came in, got on their hands and knees, and learned to drive the boards together and nail them up. It was a good experience for everybody.
Mhm.
And the bell in the belfry, if you can call the little tower we have at the church, is a locomotive bell, which he cajoled the powers that be in Norfolk Western to give the church. And he hauled it over there in the trunk of his car. And I would like to see that bell rung every Sunday. Anyway, Northside needed a minister. We had a pretty good church. We had a multi-purpose room, and we had lots of kids. I was on the committee that hired Dick. Bob Martin and I drove up to Arlington where he was assistant minister. We picked a day when he was going to preach. We left early in the morning and went up there. After his sermon, one of the elders came over and said, "Now, our minister is very sensitive to, they knew exactly what we were doing." He said, we didn't enter your names on the record, and we'd like to keep it that way. And Dick and Gene Vines invited us out to their house for a sandwich or something. And I remember going to the house and seeing Dick's motorcycle over in the yard. I said, I don't know whether we're getting a minister or not. He was the most interesting fellow.
When did you become church secretary?
That happened when Wilkie started coming over to visit us, and then he was doing the bulletin at this time. So he was doing that on Saturday, and one day when he was visiting, he said, would you be willing to come over and try, to do the bulletin? He said, I've got a guy that wants me to play golf with him on Saturdays, and I'm always tied up. That was Butch Miller. So Butch Miller decided he would pay somebody's salary if they would just come over on Saturday and do the bulletin.
Wilkie could play golf with
Wilkie could play golf with him. Yes. And I wanted to really say that Shirley Larson was a big help between the transition between Vines and...
That's right. She was the interim minister after the Australian Don Talent left.
Yeah. And she got me kind of used, I'd never worked for a woman minister. So she got me and the congregation. It's like, okay, maybe that's okay. You remember Harold Hopkins, who was our first choir director?
Yes.
And pianist. And he came over to the house one day and asked, I think this was right before I started coming back full time.
Yeah.
And he asked me, he said, we've got two men that want to sing, me and another guy. And we want to start a choir. So he said, well, you and your sister Wava come sing with us. So we come over, and we were the first choir, real officially.
You had a quartet?
We had a quartet as our choir.
Nice.
And then people started joining us, and it built.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've had several choir. Warren Weber, he really built the choir up when he was here. And then we had Sandra Brown do it for a while. And then Maria. And then she took over, and she's been a godsend to this church, and just so talented, and got so many talents. And the choir's grown, and we do have fun,
See,
but starting with Janet Cameron and Hallie Hughes and Nedra
Yeah.
and her parents,
Yeah.
and there was a Mrs. Whitman and Rose Simpkins and
Yeah.
Mary, who, he was the one instrumental in helping get the bell and he's just building the whole church. And we had the hot dog suppers on the lawn years ago. Sold them for 15 cents for a hot dog and 5 cents for a slice of cake. And the neighborhood, it was a neighborhood then, and they all
Yeah.
came out and just people like that. And then all through the years, like Nedra doing all she does for communion, and I can't think of. There's Warren Weber,
Yes.
who was so dedicated to getting the choir, and and he did a super job doing that and building it up.
Yes.
And Maria, I asked her several times, do you ever stop and thank the Lord for all your talents? And she says, yes, I do. When Danny's brother died in New York, we never been out of Blacksburg to drive, that much, except to Roanoke.
Yes.
We had to go to New York for the funeral, and we thought, oh my goodness. Wilkie stepped up, the minister, and he come over and he said, I'm going to drive y'all. And we said, what? You can't do that. We said, you have Sunday service. He said, the funeral was on Monday. He said, I'm going to leave immediately after church, and I'm driving y'all up there. It was me and Danny and Danny's mother.
Yes.
And so we got ready, and here's Janet and Hallie again. After church, she says, Martha, I want y'all to come by our house before you leave. And I said, we're going to be rushed for time. She said, I don't care. Tell Wilkie he has to stop at the house. It'll only take a minute.
Yes.
So I told him, I said, we got to go by their house for some reason. So we went, and there they stood out in their parking, in their driveway. And they had a box of sandwiches.
Oh.
They had vegetables and all in there. They had a thermos of coffee, a thermos of lemonade. They pushed it in the door of the car and they said, go.
Oh.
And you won't have to stop and eat on the way. So these are the things that Northside has done. And you remember when I helped Mrs. Wright with our first choir, little children's choir?
Tell me more.
Yeah, her husband built that organ that we had, you know.
Yeah.
She came and she wanted to start a children's choir, and she asked me if I would help her. So I helped her, and we had a really big, with like my brother and Tina and Emma and Ellen Bender
Yes.
and the Brown children. I mean, it was a real nice little
Yeah, and
choir.
our kids and the Kittle girls.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we made them robes out of sheets, that just draped over and little bows.
Yeah.
And she was so good with those children.
Well, and then after she stopped, didn't Emily take the choir over for a while? The
I
children's
think
choir?
she did,
I think
maybe.
she
Somebody did. I think it was Emily.
Yeah.
And there's another lady who has been a real inspiration to me at Northside.
Well, I just like to smooth things over.
I know. And it's a
Sometimes
real
when you
gift.
feel there's a tension or something, I might be good at easing that. Oh, well, I've helped a couple of times with the garden that the Ogburns planted down in the lower building. And I've weeded a couple of times down there and helped with the community garden. You remember when we had that down the back. I'm sorry we don't have that anymore. But that was fun, close for me to work. And the Church Women United, usually because I'm a part of that, brings those people to our church.
Yes.
Because we have, every 3 years we have it at our church.
Yes.
And I remember we were in a program one time. I forgot my part, and you helped me.
You were Lydia, right?
Yes,
With
and
the
I was
purple
purple.
dye.
I think Northside has always been a church that's welcoming. And through the years, people have come because Northside has welcomed them, but for some reason or other, either they've moved on or people who have been here for a long time have had to move on. So it's a changing congregation. I just think that everybody who's been there has contributed and has enjoyed it,
Said something about, well, don't be surprised, come Easter Sunday, we won't have Sunday school. And why not? And I said, because I told them I was going to be going to the White House to do the Easter egg hunt. Well, can we go too? I said, well, I don't know. So I went to talk to Cecile, that was this lady I mentioned earlier, and told her what the kids wanted, and she said, what age are these? I said, well, they're high schoolers. And how good are they? I said, I wouldn't be asking you to include them if they weren't good enough to do it. I said, on top of that, they are younger, they're more active, they do things with these kids that we need done that these little old ladies in the White House just cannot do. And so that's how it got started. We go up after church and spend the night, get up before daybreak the next morning, go get breakfast. We had to go through security at the White House and be done by 7:30 or 8 o'clock to wait around doing nothing until they opened the gates at 9 o'clock. The beauty of that, Frida, was these children learned a whole lot about dealing with other people. One of the things that the senior high class was asked to do was to present one service to the congregation. And one year we could not, anybody come up with anything that they could put together for the sermon. And that's how I got the clown service. The whole thing, we do the entire worship service in mime, dressed as clowns. And it comes from, I forget now what part of the Bible, somewhere it speaks of being fools for Christ. We have done it 4 times, and I can promise you, by the time that service is over, there's not a dry eye in the crowd. But we had several people in the congregation that wouldn't come to the first one, but they never missed the rest of them. I would say some of the most interesting events that have happened in church have been the children. And it's been the spontaneous thing, it's not been planned.
I was a Mr. Giesland that came up from Salem on like Friday, and he spent the night in probably Mrs. Swope. She had a boarding house, and he would spend a weekend and go back on Sunday evening. And he would visit every family that came and have supper with us. After a while, we shared ministers with Roanoke Valley.
Right.
Fred Curry was our first minister. And we had curtains from the Lyric, just big push curtains like that separated us and some other area. And the adults met in the very back of the church because it was just one room.
Yeah.
And what little children we had met in the furnace room. And that room was just a little tiny, enough for a table and a few little chairs. You know where the choir room is?
Yes.
Well, that wall is setting in about 3 or 4 feet from where the other, probably across the hallway. That was the end of the chapel at that time. And then I can't remember when we got to pews, but we did get to pews early on.
And they were from another church,
They were out of South Carolina somewhere.
I see.
I'm pretty sure Mr. Smythe made that, or maybe Miss Hallie and Miss Cameron did too, but they came and we loved those. We took really good care of them.
Oh.
And now you was talking about the communion table. He helped the man that built it, but he didn't build it. But we brought it up and we stained it.
Yeah.
With black paint first, and then we rubbed the smear of the stain over it to give it that color. But the little table out front in the Northex thing, that was our original one.
Yes.
We didn't get the one in there now until we got that end of the building. I started helping Mrs. Simpkins and Mrs. Whitman, me and my mom, with the communion.
Well,
early on.
Tell us about that.
It's not fun to wash a starched piece of linen. That's when you have to cover the communion.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh,
they did. You had to cover white here, and then you covered it. And two elders serving it had to take it off and fold it up, which was very fun to watch because it was usually my daddy and Mr. Simpkins, and they'd get it all wrinkled. And I'd be laughing. We got in trouble a lot for laughing. And I have probably helped with communion since I was probably in the 8th grade. We started our Christmas tree too.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, now that started probably in the 70s, or that could have been the late 60s too. I've got one ornament with that on it. Of course, I've got all the ornaments taken care of too. I take care of them. Mary Lowe is our leader, and she's taught. There's my machine. I could make it. Haven't turned it on my finger yet, but you would just make different little quilts, and we give them to people. And we've given quite a few away. Last year, I think we gave 4 away. Trying to clean the church. You know, we used to take turns doing that
We
too.
did. It was because we joined in the late 60s. And,
Yeah.
and a family a week
Yeah,
had the cleaning of the church to do.
yeah. And I could clean the church better than my own house. I think the whole journey has been important. And sometimes, though, I get unhappy, but then I get happy again. So, but most of the time I think things are going pretty good. Yeah.
Well,
I wish we had more people at this point, but we will come back. I'm surely hoping for that anyway.
Right after I came, I was walking by the open door of the adult forum class, and they were talking about quantum physics. And I said, "Oh, Linda, I don't think you're smart enough for this church." If I had to pick one, I would probably pick Logos. That was just such a wonderful experience. And it was fun to work with Liz Allen and Charles Bastian in teaching the children about worship. And it was a good time to have lots of children. I can remember Brian Warner being the Oompa Loompa, and I remember Kathy and Dave in their 50s garb and pajama night. Those were really good. Another highlight would be the confirmation classes over the years. Ministers don't get always a lot of immediate feedback, like I did this and here's the result. Instead, we often have to wait. And what I'm discovering now is all these children that have come through this church, and they're out there in the world, they're changing the world. And I think in great portion it's because of the ministry of this church. And the first one is 9/11, and the other one is April 16th. And both of those were terribly tragic times. But it was a time that I felt God's presence with us, and I felt the support and the connections of the congregation. I just sent the word out to the session, and I said, we need to probably talk about this. And they were all here in the middle of the afternoon, and they said, you tell us what you need, and we'll make it happen. For me personally, the music people have been really significant and important to me because I've been in the choir since I came here, and I always gravitate to the music people. Spending a couple of hours with people every Wednesday night trying to learn to sing some really difficult things is important, and I'm always especially grateful in any church for the music folks. It was a Sunday morning. We were getting ready to go into church, and Betsy Stinson came running in. She was in her wildlife force uniform, and she said, I need a blessing for a bear. I said, you do? She said, yes. This mother bear, we've relocated her 3 times, and she keeps coming back. And this is the 4th time, and I really want it to take. So will you come and bless her? I said, where is she? In the parking lot. Okay. Fortunately, she was in some sort of bear truck, and I could only put my hands on the outside of this big cage that she was in. So, but that certainly was was an interesting experience. I am greatly blessed to have been part of this church family for 20 years. And to be with all of you in your joyful times, in your struggles, and in your grief. It's what we do anyway as Christians. But I get a special place because I'm the pastor. And it's an honor to be included in those times. While we face some challenges right now, we're not at the end of our journey, and that I believe always that God has more in store. We just need to discover what it is that God has for us.
I remember gardening. I never did any of that gardening, but the whole church did. It was for the food bank. And that's what I liked about the spirit of Northside. They thought of others.
A lot of changes, really.
Yeah.
But basically, it is just the same wonderful group of people. They have been so good to me. And, just being with them and knowing their lives, and it's great. And whenever time I've needed them, they've come through.
I hope they'll always remain as welcoming as they were when I joined, and as I think we are now.
We always have somebody that's coming in to give us that little boost that we need on something. I really think we do that. Even if it's not what I think is right at the time, it works.
I believe that the more we reach out, the more vibrant a congregation we can be. It's not going to be so much about what happens inside these walls as what are we doing for people out there.